We're going to start the afternoon by talking about some of the cases that will be, I don't know, kind of a case study of some of the stuff I've been throwing at you this morning and pounding into everybody's head about how important it is to do, everything in a very consistent manner so that you preserve your evidence for the criminal case. First case study that we're going to talk about is up in Clackamas County, kind of a high elevation rural area. A woman there had 12 horses that were in emaciated condition, and one of them had the collar or the halter embedded in its face, and our officers had been out multiple times to try and get her in compliance in terms of the care and condition of her animals. One of the things that she tried to tell our investigators was that she had previously lived in an area at a much lower elevation, and when she moved them to a higher elevation is when they lost weight. So the change in elevation, she said, was directly responsible for the condition of her horses. And the numbers that she cited were that she had gone from a 300-foot elevation to 1,800 feet, and suddenly she couldn't keep any weight on her animals. The great thing about this case is that the veterinarian, the equine vet who testified for us, had previously had an equine specialty clinic in Denver, Colorado, which is an elevation of, who knows how high. So she was probably the best expert to debunk the elevation theory by our defendant. So I went there multiple times. Every time we went, we found bad situation. You know how they always say, I just ran out of food yesterday? Well, it was always, the day after yesterday when we showed up, because there was never any food, never any water. We offered for help with rehoming and veterinary care, and, we weren't, the owner ignored our offers. So we were left with no choice but to apply for a search warrant and go in for the purpose of collecting evidence of the crime of animal neglect. All right, so this is what we talked about, all the people that we need to make a great search warrant execution team and their roles on scene. Again, talking to your folks on scene, I decided to keep some of these slides in here even though they're repetitive because the pictures are such good illustrations of the things that we talked about this morning. Remember how we talked about how your volunteers and your helpers have to keep their cell phones out of the way. They can't be taking pictures or video on their own personal equipment. And this is actually one of our employees who has his cell phone out, and he's taking photographs of the horse. And we were taking evidence placard photos of the horse with him in the background. We didn't realize that had happened until the DA pointed out when he got the photos that he saw someone else in the frame who had taken pictures. So we had to hustle up and try and get our hands on those images as well so that they could be submitted. We talked about the veterinarian's role. In this case, we had a veterinarian on site because some of the horses were in such poor condition. We wanted to have the veterinarian be able to state that she thought they were stable enough to transport off the property. We talked about mapping the scene, and you can see here that we make a point to photograph the animal in place. So there's the placard, and we had it on a clipboard stuck to a bamboo pole so that we wouldn't have to be standing in the mud. We could hold it out and get it in the photograph. But then we have a photograph of that horse in the really poor conditions that it was standing in on scene. We note the time of day, the temperature, we note the behavior and attitude of the animals on scene. And this is a great video that shows you how impactful video can be compared to photographs. So if that were just a still photograph, you would just see horses in mud, but you wouldn't be able to see the difficulty that they were having moving through that mud and how, the suction was coming off of their feet as they were trying to negotiate around. We actually had about 20 minutes of video of these horses that we submitted with the case that made a great statement as to how the environment there was affecting their health and well-being. We talked about the search warrant and what you're going to add into the search warrant as far as areas to be searched. And, it's important to look and pay attention to all of the areas that, even if it doesn't seem like it would have animal husbandry stuff inside it, you're going to get authorization to at least look inside there and verify. One of the things that was important in this case was opening the doors of all of these little rental storage sheds. We didn't go through everything in there because we could see that it was Christmas decorations and clothes, but we also saw that it wasn't bales upon bales of hay. And so 6 months down the road in court, it would have been very easy for the suspect to say, oh yeah, you didn't look in those storage containers and they were full of hay. So now we have a photograph of what they were really full of and what the suspect was full of for saying that. When we photograph and seize medicine, medications, and feed, the things that we always try to be sure to get in the photograph include the veterinarian's name, who dispensed the medication, the condition that the medication is in. Does it look like it's usable? Is it empty or full or moldy or rotten? What's the expiration date? We served this search warrant in 2013, I think, or 12, and that medication was expired in 2004. So that can be significant. And if you can show what animal specifically the medication was dispensed for, so either seize that medication or get great documentation of all of the important information that you're going to need from that. Talked about the evidence lettering and how we have to get creative. We put a collar on if we can. With livestock, a lot of times we use the wax crayon markers, livestock markers, and they come in all different colors. So if you have a black horse, you use a yellow marker. If you have a white horse, you use a red marker. And you know, that's going to wear off over time, but for those first couple of days when you're doing all of your intake examination and collection of evidence, that letter or number will stay on that animal. Fecal samples are a pretty big deal to animal cases, both to show, like this is an overload of parasites in manure, but with dogs especially, getting a fecal sample from what they were producing on site before they came into your custody can show you things like, you know, how much plant material was that dog eating because it didn't have any nutritive substance available to it. Or a lot of times dogs will eat drywall or, you know, sawdust, like we talked about, bedding, grass or sticks, just to put something in its stomach. Things like plastic garbage and stuff they'll be eating. And so when you can show that there's a lot of foreign bodies in the feces, that can also help explain the suffering of the animal due to a failure by the owner to give it proper nutrition. Hay sampling is something that we have been struggling with doing correctly and being able to use it in court. But I wanted to share it because having an analysis of the nutritional content of the forage or the hay that's available to the livestock can be very important to your case. There is a hay sampling device, which is what you see in the picture there. It's a core, they call it a corer, and it's something that it reminds me of like if you were going clam digging and you stick that thing down and you turn it like this. You actually stick the sampler through the hay bale and turn it a couple of times, and what you pull out is a very good representative sample of the hay. So the hay on the outside of the bale is going to have less nutritional content than the hay in the middle. So an amalgam of that creates the overall nutritional analysis for the hay. And the proper technique is very important, we learned when bringing this up in court. We had no idea that a hay sampler existed, so we would just go around and take a handful out of the bale and put it in a bag and send it in. But we've since acquired this device and we're able to submit the samples. We talked about the physical exam and why it needs to happen within 24 hours, and we talked about the 5-view photographs. The other photographs that you need are close-up photographs of any injuries or things that you can view that you can point back to the animal neglect. We do what's called a CBC and chemistry panel for each of the animals because there are a lot of changes in an animal's blood chemistry or blood work that can be a result of inadequate nutrition or disease process or infectious disease. So for example, when you have a very skinny dog presented to you, we know that it could be that thin because it hasn't been getting fed, or it could have some disease process that's causing it to lose weight or be unable to gain weight. So the blood work is what actually oftentimes will differentiate between the two. Starvation cases, the horse people in here know that the refeeding of a starving animal, horses, dogs, most any animal, has to be done carefully and under close monitoring, because when animals are deprived of food for a great deal of time, the actual way that then they absorb and process food changes in relation to what's going in. So when you bring that animal into custody and are tempted to go, to McDonald's and get a bag of hamburgers and load up its bowl with 4 pounds of food because it's inhaling it as fast as you put it in the bowl, that can actually cause problems, acute problems that are like imbalances in the electrolytes, so it can cause an immediate reaction, and it can also cause gastric issues. So if you haven't eaten in 3 months and then you go to the buffet and gorge yourself, you might pay for it the next day or two. And the last thing we want our animals to be suffering with, if we want them to gain weight, we don't want them to have a bad case of vomiting and diarrhea for a week, because then that's just going to deplete them even further. So when you're refeeding animals that are in a body condition of 1 or 2, there's no discernible fat, make sure you're doing that under the observation and consultation with a veterinarian so that you don't cause any more problems. We talked about continuing care and follow-up. So I'll show you some photographs where the before and after photos are amazing to see, and that can be very useful in these neglect cases. This is a picture of Lucky that we found online. Remember how I told you how nice it is when your suspects put pictures of, their paycheck or their handful of cash or their horse named Lucky, who's a beautiful stallion in their care, and then we go in and find Lucky in this condition a year later. He was really lame on two feet. He did not respond to treatment and pain control, and like I said, he was a stallion, so he was difficult to work with in general. His pain was so bad that he responded with severe aggression toward his caretakers, and you can see that was a couple of bites that he gave to one of the caretakers in the barn where he was being kept. He also did a great deal of self-trauma to himself in the stall because of his pain, and he was very difficult to get that pain under control through medication and treatment. I bring this up because there are times when you may be forced to evaluate an animal for euthanasia, even though that animal is seized and in protective custody and not an animal that is surrendered to you. With the case of Lucky, we had the veterinarians really watching him closely and trying to help him very aggressively, to no avail, and so the decision was made that humane euthanasia would be the best outcome for him. And those types of things can happen in a cruelty case. You just want to document them well, get your veterinarians to make a statement and provide a report when they can, and then, to the best of your ability, loop your DA in before you do the euthanasia if you can, so that they're on board with that and they're able to get anything that they need. And then, if you can get a necropsy to support your decision, in the case of Lucky, the necropsy and veterinary report was very important. It said the stallion was suffering from severe degenerative joint disease, and all attempts to manage his pain, he remained in pain and with constant visible lameness. So your veterinary report is going to be really important to illustrate the pain and suffering, the conditions of the animals, the failure to provide care, and what that looks like. As your animals are in your care and they start to improve, it's great to get a checkup with that vet and have them support or submit a supplementary report talking about, The dog was skinny. The staff fed the dog for 2 months. Now the dog is a normal body weight. And these are some of the before and after photos of horses that are so helpful in these cases. It's not just the body condition, it's the overall condition of the horses that we want people to understand. You know, we talked earlier about having a lack of housing or shelter for horses and how that's not specifically written and required by law. But you can see, these are the horses from that mud patch, and you can see how adequate husbandry has contributed to their overall health and well-being. So these are some of our before and after photos. Mabel there. Mary is very significant weight loss in the before picture. We have things like rein rot and hoof rot and other things besides just the emaciation that has to be dealt with. A lot of these horses have really heavy parasite loads like lice and internal parasites because they're already depleted in their health, and so parasites can really take over. There's Madeline, Minnie. So the outcome in this case, the judge found the defendant guilty of 8 counts of animal neglect in the 2nd degree. She did 16 days in jail, which came out to 2 days per horse, 60 months supervised probation on each count, and she has a ban of possession on horses or livestock for 5 years.